All right, everybody, welcome back to Five Questions. I'm your host, Dustin Peed. Before I introduce my guest today, I want to remind you to like, subscribe, ring the bell if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to this podcast on any podcast platform, if you would just leave a 5-star review, that'll help me to continue push this content out. But today, I am so pumped to have a dear friend of mine and our families, and someone that we've known and kind of worked with in and out throughout the years and supported, Ben Arment. Ben, what's up, man? How you doing?
Man, it is good to be here. Dustin, I feel like we go way back, but I feel like our friendship is growing exponentially in these last couple of years just because our wives are now friends and we're
Yeah,
just digging in, man. Digging in.
we are. I love Ben for so many different reasons. Most of all, just the person that he is, not so much what he does, but what he does is incredible as well. And we're gonna get into that. Today's 5 questions is going to be centered around process, specifically about the entrepreneur process, because there's a handful of people or less that I think of when I think about true entrepreneurism and crushing it. And Ben is one of them. We talked just before we started recording about me reading his bio. It's super long because there's so many different cool things: Catalyst, whiteboard sessions, Men of the Woods, production companies, on and on. He just told me that he had eight eight pans on the burner right now. So he's got a lot going on, but he's always got time for people. He always has time for his family, which I know for those of you that are watching and listening is also super important. So we're going to dive right in with these 5 questions today. Ben, why did you choose to kind of venture out on your own and enter into this entrepreneurial spirit?
Man, I tried to work for other people. I really, really tried. I gave it my best. And you know what? I got into it. I remember I went to work for Catalyst. It's one of the few years that I've worked for other people, but I worked at Catalyst conference in Atlanta, Georgia, back when it was the thing. And I remember on the day of my interview, I was being walked around through the office by one of the vice presidents of the company. And he
Hmm.
goes, Ben, he goes, there's just one thing that concerns me. He said, looking at your resume, you've always worked for yourself. What makes you think you could work for us here? So I gave him my best answer. I said, I think I have a lot to contribute. And, I'm mature now. And gosh, I gave it 3 weeks and I was just chomping at the bit to work for myself because there's just so much freedom in that. And there are fewer committees to decide whether your ideas are good ones or not.
Mm,
And
yeah.
it was a great experience. I was there for a little over a year, but that's as long as I lasted. I needed to do something where I could spread my wings and try my ideas.
Yeah. I love it. So you talked
Yeah.
even I didn't even know this about you. So before Catalyst, you had kind of worked for yourself as well. Who
Mhm.
kind of invested in you and taught you how to kind of live this lifestyle, to kind of live this career path? Did anyone ever kind of teach you
Yeah.
this or invest in you or coach you in this at all?
I've thought about that because as I am raising 5 children now and I'm trying to pour into them some of these values of entrepreneurship, I begin thinking, well, gosh, what inspired me? And looking back, it came from a very unconventional source. My dad was not an entrepreneur, he was a pastor, a school administrator. But the thing about my dad that I have to give credit to is that he was a forward thinker. I remember when the first Macs came out from Apple, he was one of the first people I knew who purchased one of those. And so I got my hands on one when I was really young. And then
Early
here's the other
adopter.
thing. My dad, early adopter. And in fact, my
Mhm.
dad, I don't know his exact age right now, which is terrible, but he's probably mid to late 70s. And he just started a podcast like a couple of weeks ago. But the
Whoa.
thing about my dad that it's crazy. But the thing I would say about him that gave me a lot of courage and inspiration is that my dad never feared quitting a job ever.
Hmm.
Like he didn't think that he couldn't go out and go get another one at the drop of a hat. And he was right. My dad was well educated and he was a great man. He is a great man and great at what he does. But he never feared walking away from something if it wasn't right for our family or for him or
Hmm.
for the career path. And I think just the courage to be able to say, I don't need this. is kind of the
Mm.
fundamental sort of belief that an entrepreneur needs to have. So,
Yeah,
my dad.
man. I love it. I'm going to skip a question and come back to the third one in a second. But I think many people, there's kind of, whenever you have any subject of specificity come up, people have kind of recurring questions, right? I
Hmm.
always get asked this question, I always get asked this question. And I know for my entrepreneur friends, they always get asked the question, when is the right time to quit your job? So if you are working for someone else and you're
Hmm.
feeling the tug,
Hmm.
how do you know when is that right time to quit?
Well, I've got to tell you, it probably depends on your stage in life. You can choose to make bolder decisions and more courageous decisions when it's just you, or if it's
Yeah.
just you and a young wife, or you and a young husband. If you've got three kids, a mortgage, and you know college tuition you're trying to pay off, or what have you, that's a little bit tougher. I will tell you, just from experience, when I was working at Catalyst, I was itching to start an event called Story, that was a creative gathering, bringing artists of all kinds together to learn from other great creatives. And I was excited to do it. And I was at a crossroads. My wife and I had two young children at the time, very young. And we either could have bought a house, bought into the McMansion lifestyle in
Mm,
Atlanta. We could have doubled down and built up a nice 401k. But we knew that if we did that, we were going to miss out on this calling that we felt, or this great sense of disconnect. I think the word is discontent,
mm,
in fulfilling our desires in a different way. And so we made an incredibly courageous decision. And I want to tell you, Dustin, it was a really tough year. That first story event, I think anybody who attended it back in, I guess it was 2008, maybe, they walked into a full theater, but what they didn't know is that like 85% of the people who were at that event were attending as a personal friend or a scholarship recipient of mine. And that's
mm,
because as we started promoting the event, it wasn't filling up. And I had to do something very dire to, or drastic to fill the venue and make it look like a success. And that's ultimately what led it to become successful over the next few years, was kind of that perception early on that it was a success, even though it wasn't. So I don't know how to answer that question. It depends on how much hunger you've got, how much
mm.
drive you have, how much courage you have. For me, I needed to do it, or I wasn't going to be able to live with myself. I don't
So
know if that
what's
answers the
one
question, but
No, no, I
yeah.
think it does. I think it's dependent as well. I
Mhm.
think your answer is great because I think so many times when people ask these kind of standard questions, the kind of shortcut questions, they want a
Mhm.
shortcut answer, and there really is no cookie cutter shortcut answer for these things, especially
Mhm.
when you're talking about quitting something that is sustaining you in your livelihood. You know, so
Mhm.
I totally agree. I think it's definitely circumstantial. But what's one thing that
Mhm.
someone can do who wants to be an entrepreneur today? What's one thing that they can do today that gets them one step closer to that goal?
I feel like you answered that question as we were talking a little bit before the call. You were talking about you're doing some things to kind of throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And
Yeah.
that would be the thing that I would say as well, Dustin, is that you've really got to try stuff, and you've got to be willing to fail. And I think people are afraid of failure because they're afraid that people will think of them as failures. And the truth is that nobody is paying close enough attention to even care what you're doing. Uh,
Yep.
so it's
Which is a
important to
hard
try
lesson.
stuff. Oh, it's a hard lesson, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to try and fail. Be willing to fail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you
Okay.
add on to that? I feel like you're kind of in that same
Yeah.
realm I am.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's where I'm at right now. Is just trying to have been
Mm.
with this content stuff since the beginning of the year. That's kind of why we've been doing, five
Mhm.
topics instead of just kind of narrowing in on one topic. I did my research with people that know
Mhm.
me really well, and the same five topics kept coming up over and over again. And I
Mhm.
was like, well, I'm just gonna lean into all five of these. And already, 5, 6 months into it, I can start to see, okay, here's where my strong suit is. Here's where my traction is. Here's the most clicks. Here's the most,
Mm, mhm.
bites, that, that kind of stuff, and go, okay, that I can kind of see some are more, more appetizing to my audience than others. And
Yeah.
just trying different things. And just, it's like,
Mhm,
great writers, will, you ask a great writer, well, what's the first thing I need to do to become a great writer? And they're like,
mhm.
just write, you know?
Just right.
And so, if
Yeah.
I think if you have an idea, like, there's something to creating quickly. There's a friend of
Mhm.
mine named Blake who was on this show very early on with me. He's kind of a guru of team culture.
Hmm.
And, he would tell me back in the day when we were creating together, he's like, man, I just find value in creating quickly.
Hmm.
There's no time for me to second guess and play devil's advocate in my own mind as to
Yeah.
how this thing's actually gonna turn out,
Mhm.
and kind of talk myself out of it at all. But as you were saying, entrepreneurs
Mm.
before the call as well, entrepreneurs, we now have the freedom, because we're not spending 40 hours plus a week,
Mhm.
in an office or in a factory or in a store or whatever place. We have that margin,
Mhm. Mhm.
to create quickly, and just gonna try it. Another friend of mine, an author, Will, I've had on the show before. Will said the same thing. I said, "Hey, man, I got some content that I want to release, but I want to do it right." He goes, "Forget that, just release it." And I go, "Okay,
Okay.
seems a little scary, but I get what you're saying. It's just
Mhm.
do it, right?"
Right.
So,
Yeah.
uh, which leads me to my last question.
Mhm.
Without giving us the typical Nike slogan answer, how does one actually become an entrepreneur?
Oh gosh, I want to say that if you can imagine a Venn diagram with four circles, these would be the four circles that collide into the sort of the sweet spot in the center. One would be,
I love it.
yeah, you've got to have something that you're gifted at, passionate about, something that you really care deeply about, and that will sustain you through the hard times. It's the thing that you would do even if you weren't paid to do, that kind of thing. And then the other one is you've got to be able to have a source of undervalued resources that you can share with your community in that realm. So, what I mean by that is great story about Banana Republic. The way that their retail store began was they found a warehouse full of surplus army uniforms and outfits and khakis and things like that, and the lady out of the duo that started Banana Republic simply styled them and made them look great, and they blew up. And so their quest was to go find all these army surplus warehouses all over the world, and they purchased their inventory, and eventually they started to run out of inventory. And by that time, their brand had built large enough that they could invest in other clothes and manufacturing their own stuff. But um, it's a powerful thing when you find something that is undervalued and you have it in abundant supply. I'll give you two other quick examples. The Dollar Shave
Yeah.
Club was started by somebody who was talking to a guy who owned a warehouse full of a bunch of razors and he didn't know what to do with them. So, completely undervalued, excess supply. To make it personal, my wife and I run a company called Wild and Free, and the undervalued asset in abundant supply is actually incredible women and mothers who are stay at home all over the world who are extraordinary photographers and writers. And that is the undervalued abundant supply. So that's, I guess, number two. Number three would be you've got to have a platform. And I don't necessarily believe it has to be social media. I hate
Yeah.
social media. I would be off social media if I could. But I like following friends and staying connected in that way. But platforms can be relationships. One of my dear friends is a guy by the name of Dave Dyer, and he runs a company called Manifesto. And he's got a meager Instagram account, but that man has a platform that is just hand in hand, sitting across from a dinner table from somebody or drinking a glass of whiskey somewhere. The man is just an extraordinary connector. And that is more powerful than any, really, honestly, any social media brand I can think of. So it doesn't need to be
Yeah.
an online platform, but you definitely need a platform where people will be aware of what you're offering. And number four, I'm not sure I can remember it at this point, but I do have a number 4. If I think of it, I'll come back to it.
That's great. I got to meet Dan Dyer at Men of the Woods a couple years ago, a couple summers
Mhm.
ago. One of the events that y'all put on at your Wild and
Yeah.
Free Farm Village in Virginia, and you're absolutely right. That dude's quality
Mhm.
his
Mhm.
relational equity is highly
Yeah.
rich, and he
It's
can make
incredibly
the
rich, yeah.
lowest person in the room feel
Mhm.
like the most important person in the room, which really I think
Mhm.
goes a long way no
Mhm.
matter what field you're in at all. So
Oh,
yeah,
I
man.
thought of number 4 too. So number 4 is
Yes.
actually this is something you don't have a lot of control over. It just takes some astute observation, but it is demand, and it's sort of that for such a time as this sort of
Yep.
component. I want to tell you, Dustin, I have started organizations where it wasn't a for such a time as this moment, and it feels like you are walking up an escalator that is going down. The effort that you have to
Mm,
put into it is much harder than it needs to be. When you enter a field where your moment is now and the demand is there, it's like riding an escalator up. You're hardly even having to sell your offering. So, those are the
yeah.
4, in my humble opinion.
No, that's fantastic. That is highly valuable content that I know that myself needs right now,
Mm.
and that the people that are watching and listening to this need as well. I was going to share your social media handle, but I'm not going to, because because no, if you want to see Ben's beautiful family and the cool things that they're up to, I'll put it up on the screen here in post production. Ben Arment, but instead of MENT, it's M3NT,
Mhm.
because Ben is super creative and a genius at everything he does. So but yeah, we love you, Ben. We love your family. Everything that y'all are doing with Wild and Free has obviously changed our life. We're a part of the Wild and Free
Mhm.
network. My wife leads the West Georgia group here
Wow.
in West Georgia, and it's just
Mhm.
incredible. While you were talking about it, I was seeing her outside of these windows here picking up chicken eggs from our chickens outside of this window. So I was like, man, if he could only see what I'm seeing right now. But
That's great.
yeah, man,
That is
I,
great.
I so appreciate your time today. I know it was quick, but it's super valuable, I think, to everybody listening and watching as well. So thank you so much for your time, Ben.
Thank you.
All right, we'll catch you next time on 5 Questions. See you later.